I'm gonna make sure that we're connected. Takes me a few seconds. Thanks for your patience. Alrighty, we're live now. Okay, let's get things started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our kickoff of the Siamak discussion series, Siamak Talks. The discussion tonight will be on representing us. I'm Ashley. I am Siamak's campaign manager and the moderator for this night. And we have Siamak, who is running for Utah State House District 49. And our special guest tonight is Josh Kanter, who is the founder for Alliance for a Better Utah. So the way that tonight will roll out is the first half will be a discussion between Siamak and Josh. And in the second half, we will go through any Q&A questions that you're allowed to start submitting to me via the Q&A feature at the. So with that, Siamak, I'll let you take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you so much, Josh. I have to say it's an absolute honor to have finally met Josh. I have known, had heard of his name for years, and all the wonderful work that the Alliance for Better Utah has done. And today I actually get to have a conversation with him, almost one-on-one, and with millions of people watching, right? So before doing that, I want to welcome everyone to this Facebook Live, to our campaign and to our effort this year. This is something that we started not too long ago, started in March. And since then, we have taken leaps in accomplishing what we have accomplished. And I want to welcome everybody on board. Come join us, join our campaign team, join our efforts, whether it's by canvassing, phone banking, helping us form our platform, anything that you can possibly do. So it's an honor being with all of you. Josh,
hi.
I want to welcome you, and I would love to hear you talk about Alliance for Better Utah, its history, and some of the major initiatives that it's been involved with.
Sure, I would love an opportunity to do that. And first, let me thank you for having me on. It's great to meet you as well, finally. I've obviously been hearing about you for a long time as well. And Ashley, thanks for putting this together. And most importantly, to some extent, Siamak, let me just say thank you for running, because I think more people need to take that leap of faith and get out there and try it and do it. I've never done it, and I commend you for doing it. And I'm really grateful that you're doing it for our district. Thank you for doing it, and thank you for having me on, and thanks to all of you who are tuning in. Yeah, so as was mentioned, obviously I'm the founder of the Alliance for a Better Utah, and I'm still the chairman of the board of directors. We're an organization that was founded about almost 10 years ago. We've started in 2011. For anybody who was around during the 2010 kind of time frame, much of what got us started was this idea of what if there was a scandal and nobody cared? And that really came from, if you were around for the gubernatorial race in 2010, from a UDOT scandal that erupted over the bidding for the I-15 rebuild during the Olympics back in 2002, and some things that came public back in 2010. And when we, some colleagues of mine looked around and sort of did a little bit of a survey of the political landscape, I guess, in Utah, and saw that in our view, we had a lot of really great organizations, frankly, on both sides of the aisle. There were some really strong conservative voices. There were some very strong progressive voices. But typically, especially on the progressive side, those voices were pretty issue specific. So obviously, we have fantastic groups like Equality Utah, ACLU, Planned Parenthood, you name it, lots and lots of good groups. But there was really nobody who was what I would consider kind of a generalist, who was really willing to say anything that needed to be said, that was willing to speak up about issues as they came up. And this UDOT scandal was kind of a perfect example of something that there was no organization that had any skin in the game to really come talk about. So we founded the Alliance for Better Utah really kind of on these three pillars. One was balance, accountability, and transparency. And balance really related to balancing the conversation to make sure that in the public square there was a thorough conversation about issues. Accountability was really making sure that public officials, particularly elected officials, were accountable to their voters and to the to their constituents, and transparency was just about government transparency. So if you look at the work we've done, and it's interesting, at least over the last 10 years, many people really are familiar with the projects that we've done and not familiar with who we are. And that's to some extent been intentional, and to some extent it's an unfortunate byproduct of the way we work, because I really believed that we needed to be a key voice in particular issues, and it wasn't about the Alliance for Utah. It certainly wasn't about Josh or our executive director. So a few examples, I guess, of some of the things that we've been involved with. We're probably most famous for our work during the John Swallow affair, the Attorney General back in those early years, who he and his predecessor were kind of accused of running a pay-to-play operation out of the Attorney General's office. And ultimately, our work, which started with a bar complaint and a election law complaint, led to an investigation by the legislature and ultimately to Mr. Swallow's resignation from office. So that was probably one of the biggest things that we were involved with. On the accountability side, there are lots of issues like that. I would say not as big, obviously, as driving a state attorney general out of office, but we've, tackled anything from racist comments from city council people to hit and run situations, to a judge down in Carbon County who insisted on taking a foster child away from a married couple because he believed his judgment that the child was better off in a heterosexual family was more important than the Supreme Court decision that had recently been issued. So those are the kinds of accountability issues that we typically deal with. On transparency, we've had any number of different things. Some people may remember that GRAMA, the Government Records and Management Act, is what that stands for, which is our basically FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, was being amended at one point, and there were several people in the legislature who were trying to make sure that text messages and email messages were not subject to GRAMA. And so we were working hard on those kinds of things. So that kind of is the transparency side. It also turned out that, like now, redistricting was a big issue as we were getting started. We were just past the 2010 census, and there were a number of groups working on redistricting. And so we came in to help organize some of those groups and put them together and really make sure that that process had some transparency as well. And there'll be, I know we're going to talk about the propositions, I hope, during this conversation, so I won't go too deeply into that, but there are a lot of parallels, I think, in what happened back in 2011 and sort of what we're starting to see now, notwithstanding Proposition 4 and the Better Boundaries effort. Medicaid expansion, also obviously a recent proposition, something we've been involved in since back in 2011, and many of you may remember waking up one day and seeing the front page of both the Deseret News and the Salt Lake Tribune with 360 crosses planted on the Capitol lawn that the legislators had to walk through to get to work that day. And that was our work, resulting from a Harvard study that had looked at how many people had died in each state that had not expanded Medicaid, and our number in Utah was 361, I think. And so we went out and planted that night 361 crosses on the Capitol lawn to keep the conversation alive. So a lot of what we do is in the earned media space. It's really trying to make sure that there's a clever way of bringing what I believe is intellectually honest work. That was a study from Harvard University. It wasn't Alliance for a Better Utah making something up, and trying to bring that to life in a way that really engages our community in a conversation. And then we have Alliance for a Better Utah is a 501c4 for those of you who pay attention to tax code issues. And then we also have a 501c3. So both of those are nonprofits, but the 501c3 side is entirely nonpartisan. It's got a separate board of directors. It does its own things. And that side, many of you have probably seen, we host the only state level legislative debates in Utah. We've done that since the 2012 election cycle. We do that in conjunction with the John R. Park Debate Society up at the University of Utah. We issue a number of kind of white paper reports, and we also issue a report card on all of our legislators. So interestingly, though, I don't think we'll spend a lot of time talking about it. Our current representative in HD 49 received a D. So we don't think he didn't quite fail, but he wasn't an A student in Alliance for Utah's view of how he should be representing our constituents. So that's a little bit of background. I mean, I could talk forever about Alliance for Utah, and that's not the point of tonight, so I'll stop there. And if anybody has questions as we get to the Q&A portion of that, I'm happy to answer that.
Well, Josh, that is absolutely impressive. Just a short life, just 9 years into it, and you've accomplished so much.
Well, thanks. It's been fun.
It sounds like. So let's start with one of the most critical issues people are dealing with right now, which is obviously COVID-19. In addressing representation during this period, how has our state's leadership performed, in your opinion?
Wow. It's an interesting, question, because of course, I suppose like anything, there's obviously a multitude of opinions out there. I mean, my personal opinion is, Utah has done okay. I like to say that I think as it compares to other states that have the, I'll try to stay as nonpartisan about this as I can, the type of leadership that we have, I think we've actually been pretty good, right? And I think that in terms of the business response and the connection to the federal government response, obviously unemployment insurance benefits and PPP loans and things like that, which is probably a little bit more of a pat on the back for Zions Bank than it is for the state. We've done pretty well. I think that, my personal view, and it's really frankly nothing more than that, is that the state hasn't done enough, that the state has trailed the leaders of places like Summit County and Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City, who have recognized the urgency of some of these things, including, for example, most recently, the mask mandates coming out in Salt Lake County from Mayor Wilson, and the Herbert administration's hesitance to do that. And I understand in some respect, a one size doesn't fit all. Maybe Utah is a perfect example of not wanting to enforce a mask mandate in some of the rural parts of the state where they may not need it. But it also took a big fight to get that local control. We're a state that likes to talk about local control when it's fighting the federal government, but when the municipalities want to do something different, well, maybe local control should stop at the state level. And so I think, I'd give us maybe a C.
You're
what do you
generous.
think?
You're generous.
Okay.
But I do want to give kudos and credit to Salt Lake County for its leadership, stand in its own ground, even though some of the cities around the county are not in agreement with the county leadership. Salt Lake County has been a leader in the state. Yeah. And because of that, we're all seeing that, well, the numbers in Salt Lake County are rather plateauing. In many other parts of the state, they're still increasing. So kudos to the Salt Lake County government.
I should probably, in full disclosure, make sure that anybody watching knows that I have a vested interest in that. My wife is deputy mayor of Salt Lake County, and so I do have a particular bias, perhaps, toward.
We're grateful to her work. So, Josh, let's take a step back in the year when things were normal. Back in January, when we were all gathering around Harmon's, trying to signature gather for the tax referendum. Can you talk to us about the tax reform bill, its intended goals, ramifications, and the opposition to it?
Sure. A lot of this, again, is, of course, my opinion, but the bill really, or the idea of tax reform, of course, tax reform is a constant in politics and in our society. I think the idea in this go-around, of course, really came because the argument started around we have a structural imbalance in the state's budget, and we have a real fundamental shift in the way our tax system is matching what's happening in our economy. And that really, of course, focused on the idea that Utah relies, of course, on a sales tax and income tax and property tax. And our income tax revenues are projected to start to decline, particularly because society is moving, of course, more and more toward a service sector type of economy. And in particular, many of those service sectors are exempt from income tax. So income tax is going down. Income tax also, by by the Utah Constitution, as I'm sure everybody knows, is earmarked to education. And so if you look at the general fund, the concern was income tax doesn't really help. Income tax revenues are going down. We need to do something to fundamentally shift the way income tax, or the way that our tax system works. Was this an emergency? I would argue no. This has been, a developing thing. It's happening kind of every day in some sense. And so I think that, in my view, the legislature really rushed into this in a way that was unnecessary. If I remember right, wasn't there a special session even that they tried to rush into with this the first time around? I can't really remember, but anyway. And so, of course, the tax reform proposals started to come out that did look at taxing various service sector industries, that looked at modifying the income tax and reducing it so that this whole thing, as they looked at it, would become revenue neutral. Looked at changes in the sales tax in particular, I think bringing back the food tax. And some of those things, of course, really upset Utahns. And whether that was at the food tax level, which is a highly regressive tax, as we all know, it may or may not be, Natalie Gochner, an economist up at the U, will argue that it's not as effective as that tax exemption as an EITC credit and something that's a little bit more surgical. But at the same time, it's, most Utahns, I think, really recognize that the food tax was highly regressive. It was going to put an overburden on the poor and working class of Utah, and that we really should be looking at this more carefully. And then I think also you saw special interests start to get involved. And so, I can make the economic argument of why we shouldn't tax legal services, but the lawyers were left out, the gardeners were left in, and things like that, right? And so it was really a rushed process. And obviously a group of very dedicated groups and individuals got together and said, we're gonna push for this referendum, and they did a great job and shockingly, pulled it off, and ultimately led to the repeal of that bill. So I think it's an interesting question in my mind, and I think it deserves a lot of really serious discussion and serious work to look at what tax reform ought to look like. The argument that our state income tax is too high is, in my view, kind of a red herring. It's, if you look at the states around us, obviously Nevada and Wyoming have no income tax, so yes, we're higher than them, but I don't believe we're losing business. In fact, we lost the outdoor retailer show to Colorado, not because of our tax rates, right, but because of other policies. So our tax rate is, on that side, is really not high, and on our sales tax, our combined sales and local tax on average is actually below most of our surrounding states as well. So I think it's an issue that really the legislature needs to focus on. There's probably a lot of truth to the structural imbalance. And then, sorry, one other thing I'd like to say about that is that in that proposal, of course, was also a discussion about potentially amending the Constitution, which would require a vote of the citizens of Utah, but amending the Constitution in order to allow the income tax earmarked to education to be modified and to be used for other things. And we've kind of been down that road before. And so my view of that, and I hate to be this cynical, but that's a big leap of faith to trust the legislature on education funding when we're 51st in the nation. 51st, 50 states, and we're 51st because of the District of Columbia. So we're 51st in the nation in per pupil funding. And we kind of have had some experience with this. When the Huntsman flat tax was passed, when higher education was allowed into that income tax bucket, we've seen what that did to tax receipts and tax allocation to K through 12 education. And we've been suffering for it for the last 20 or 30 years because of those two events. So it's a big issue. It takes some serious time. It's, this is not an issue that can be won on bumper stickers, right? It's a really important, hard thing that we've got to face. Hope that was okay.
It was perfect. Perfect. Thank you. All I want to say is I'm just proud of our the citizens of Utah, especially in Salt Lake County, that stood up to that inhumane bill and gathered signatures. I'm proud of Harmon's for its leadership and participation in that effort, and making sure that the burden is not passed through the most needy in our community. I know that the food tax was a small part of that, but whether we need to have another reform, that kind of thing cannot be passed on to the people who can afford it the least. So.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I think the other thing I would say about that is I would certainly echo your comment of commending the citizens, you know, who got out there and made that happen, and that was a Herculean effort, and really amazing that they pulled it off.
Exactly.
To the legislature, you know, including our representative, I would say these are the kinds of issues that deserve time, they deserve attention, they deserve real public input, and they don't, you know, deserve to be rushed through special sessions or even a single legislative session. You know, these are again structural problems that they didn't come up overnight, and they're not going to be solved overnight. And so, you know, I hope that our legislature would take a little bit more time and a little more patience and input from the public, and really consider the public's input and what they're doing.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure that it's stated now that our district, House District 49, did oppose that tax reform. Actually, I think it was something like 57% or so, if I'm not mistaken. But it's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Actually, but I see in the chat that someone had raised a question about the Huntsman flat tax. And
yeah,
please go ahead.
Michelle commented
yes,
about that. Said,
you know, Utah had a progressive income tax before we passed the 4.75, 4.95, whatever it was, flat tax 5% under John Huntsman. And when we did that, that drove down total income tax receipts because of the flat tax, and particularly then in the decades since that's happened, decades maybe too long, I'm not sure what year that was. I want to say it was like 95 or something like that, but I can't remember. That because we've lost that progressiveness in the tax system, as incomes have gone up, tax rates have not gone up. And so all of that incremental revenue, income tax revenue that the state would have received by having that progressive tax system in place, especially on higher earners, is no longer funneling into the education system. So I'm not sure that's the perfect economic answer, but hopefully that addressed the comment that a little bit that was made in the chat there.
I want to thank, was that Rochelle? I want to thank Rochelle then for that question.
Rochelle.
It was, but I
That's awesome.
Sure if we were
That's
identifying
awesome.
people.
Thank you for that. So Josh, let's talk about the three propositions from 2018. They received majority support from our state House district, and nonetheless, they were tinkered with only 3 months later. After Proposition 3, which was the Medicaid expansion passed in November 2018, and by a majority of Utahns actually in the throughout the state, in the 2019 session, the legislature gutted the proposition, resulting in a much more expensive program while covering significantly less people. Instead of covering 138% of the federal poverty guideline, it covered 100%. The revised version required a waiver from the feds in order to become law. Ironically, the feds ruled that the revised version violated the federal parameters of the ACA with a working requirements for qualification of coverage. At the aftermath of that decision, the default position was the version passed by the voter mandate, which was the full Medicaid expansion. Do you see legislature revisiting this expansion again in the coming season?
I don't know if they're going to revisit this one. I do think, you know, they obviously amended all three, Prop 2 dealing with medical marijuana, Prop 3 with Medicaid expansion, and of course, Prop 4 with better boundaries. I hope we'll have an opportunity to talk for a few minutes about maybe why they do those things, and what I perceive as kind of their hatred may be too strong, but their kind of hatred towards citizen initiatives and citizen democracy, so to speak. I also think that on Prop 3 in particular, you've got a really big issue going all the way back to the fact that the Affordable Care Act, also of course known as Obamacare, comes from President Obama. And we have a particular Utah hatred for all things federal government and all things President Obama. So I think it's an interesting journey. If you go all the way back, obviously, after the ACA was passed, we had the Healthy Utah Plan proposed by Governor Herbert, which was a pretty good plan, quite honestly, right? It was very near
the very first one, yeah,
and full expansion. And of course, the legislature took that power away from him quickly. And then that, obviously failed. And then we started to see what I kindly refer to as the Jim Dunnigan bills. He wasn't solely responsible, but all the bills that were covering very few people at a much higher cost, none of which were going to get federal approval to the extent, as you already noted, that they might need any of those waivers. And I think in the waiver that we needed for the bill that was passed, we already kind of knew, I can't remember if it was Arkansas or what the state was, but it had already been rejected somewhere else. So the idea that Utah had it in the bag, which is what the legislature was telling us, right, was, I think, a bit disingenuous. Whether they revisit it at this point or not, I'm not sure. I really don't know. I think they got beaten up pretty badly over Prop 2, 3, and 4 and tax reform, as we already talked about. But they, as a body, they don't seem to me to be particularly concerned with getting beaten up by the citizens. And quite frankly, we as voters don't hold them tremendously accountable, and so nothing changes.
Okay. On that very positive note, so let's stay on the propositions. Let's talk about the fun stuff, the gerrymandering, Proposition 4. What really happened at the legislature? The legislature introduced the Senate Bill 200 redistricting amendments, which removes transparency and accountability requirements for the legislature as voters instituted via the proposition. Why would a representative want to take away transparency and accountability?
It's a great question. And I think if you continue these, you may very well want to have somebody come on and chat directly from Better Boundaries. Better Boundaries did again, kind of like tax reform, it was a Herculean effort to get on the ballot, to get that initiative passed. True of all the initiatives, but Better Boundaries really, they had a heavy lift, and they obviously pulled it off. The risk with the citizen initiative process is difficult, and of course, every time something comes close to success, the legislature makes it a little bit harder. And certainly they did that in this process of seeing Prop 2, 3, and 4 all pass. We've made it now harder to get an initiative passed. We've made it easier, being the legislature or the state, we've made it easier to get signatures removed. We've simply made it harder and harder. So I think by the time you get to Prop 4 and redistricting, and now, I think you have to layer in that when it comes to medical marijuana, Medicaid expansion, and even if you go back originally, don't forget there was a Prop 1, which was Our Schools Now, that never got anywhere, but it was at least another proposition. The legislature was dealing with citizens stepping kind of into their legislative bailiwick, so to speak, but Prop 4 is really addressing their power, right? And I think, in my view, and I don't know that Better Boundaries would agree with me, and we are two separate organizations, and I think that's really important for our listeners to understand. The legislature looked at this and said, our power is being taken away. And so you said, why would they remove accountability and transparency? And I would say, why would they not defend their power? The whole idea around redistricting reform and an independent redistricting commission is to take away the power to protect incumbency, to take away the power to game the system, and to put that into, hopefully, there's no perfect system, but hopefully a more independent and a more, or a less biased system, which is what the Independent Redistricting Commission is designed to do. So the amendments, compared to repeal, which of course is something they could have done. I mean, keep in mind, the problem with the citizen initiatives is they're just laws, right? I mean, they could be repealed the next day. In fact, Prop 2, I think, was actually done as a full repeal and replace. So I think that, you know, you look at the amendments that they made in that bill, and it protects a little bit of their power. And frankly, I would go back, because it's sort of my Utah local politics upbringing, to redistricting in 2011. And for anybody who was around, you may remember that we spent what then seemed like a lot of money. I don't remember what it was. I want to say it was like $100,000. That doesn't seem like enough money. On some fancy software that people could draw their maps, and you know, you could go online and you could submit maps, and there were thousands and thousands of maps that were submitted, including by, you know, people qualified to actually do that, as opposed to me sitting around. I mean, I think I did some, but you know, there were people who were really qualified to do it. And at the end of the day, all of that was ignored. And the legislature, you know, went from town to town, and they held their little public meetings, and it looked like a really nice dog and pony show. And at the end of the day, they did what they wanted to do. And for Alliance for Road to Utah, we kind of had this joke. We had a locked briefcase that we carried to all of these meetings. And the idea was that this has already been done. The legislature already knows what they're going to do, and it's in this briefcase. And in fact, I think that's pretty close to true. So I truly hope that they don't tinker further with Prop 4 in the 2021 session. I truly hope that Better Boundaries has built a relationship with the legislature and with the state that will preserve the integrity of what they've built. It'll be great for Utah. It really will. I mean, it's so important to have our districts drawn properly. And, you know, this affects everything from our House and Senate districts to obviously our congressional districts. And it's just incredibly important work. So hopefully they won't tinker further, but to your original question of why would they do it, I think it's a direct threat to their power. Plain and simple.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's my final question to you then. What are our next steps? What can we do as voters to prevent legislators deciding that they know the will of the people better than we do?
Well, it's again, obviously a great question. I mean, I think, you know, and I don't mean to sound flippant about it. I mean, the first and most important thing is everybody needs to get out and vote, right? I mean, we live in a state and in an era where, whether it's, you know, Democrats in Utah who don't believe their vote matters, or young people who don't think that voting matters, I just don't know what to say to everybody other than your vote matters and you have to go vote. So let's start with that, right? As maybe cliche as that sounds, get out and vote. As long as we let the same people make the same decisions and don't hold them accountable, they'll continue to do it. It's you know, politics is by nature about power. So I think that's one issue. I think another issue is to realize these aren't losses, right? I mean, Prop 2, Prop 3, Prop 4, we can all get very upset that the legislature did what they did, but we are miles ahead of where we were before each of those propositions was passed. And so it may not look the same. It's important to recognize these aren't constitutional amendments. These are just laws that the legislature has every right to tinker with. And I disagree with how they did it personally, but they tinkered with them, and we still have those laws. All three of those laws in one form or another are still on the books. We need to make sure that, like the tax reform situation, we're prepared to get active and go hold the legislature accountable and make our voices heard. And whether, you know, for everybody that's different, right? For me, it started on the op-ed pages, which is where Alliance for Better Utah kind of came from. For other people, it's, you know, holding up a sign and going and marching down by the Capitol or in downtown Salt Lake City or in your local community. For other people, it's going to be working on your campaign. For other people, it's going to be joining a group like Alliance for Better Utah or Planned Parenthood. I don't care what it is. find what your passion is and go pursue it and be ready to stand up, because standing up matters. And then I think, you know, with respect specifically to these initiatives, the other thing that I think people have to watch out for and be ready to be vocal about is the way that they're tinkering with them. You know, a lot of states have a provision where if something is passed as a citizen initiative, the legislature can't touch it for anywhere from, let's say, another year to a multitude of years. That maybe is something that I don't think that's been proposed here. Maybe that should come up. In fact, the legislature went the opposite direction and said, well, citizen initiatives that are passed now take a whole other cycle, right, before they're effective. But we need to be vigilant. We need to be prepared to be involved, and just understand that it's not a black and white. We didn't lose these things, right? Again, we really did. We won something, and we're miles ahead further. And I would say, particularly in the districts where the citizens voted, like they did in our district here in HD 49, in favor of these propositions, you know, those are the legislators who most need to be held accountable. And there are legislators who will say, well, my district didn't vote for it, even though it passed statewide. I don't buy that argument. I think the state passed something and they need to follow it. But, you know, there are districts like ours where these things pass convincingly, and we should hold people accountable for that.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for your vision and your leadership. This is, I think a lot of times, it's very easy for us to just get disappointed or resort to, you know, just become Facebook warriors. No offense to Facebook as we are on it live, but what I want is for everybody to please do something very, very meaningful. This is a crucial election season. This could be one of the election seasons of our lives. A lot of lives actually depend on this. So I want to encourage each and everyone to please seek out people that are champions of change. Call them up, see how you can help, how you can pitch in, how you can become part of that change. We all want you, all of us, to go vote. But honestly, maybe it's self-serving, but honestly, that's not enough. We need everybody who is passionate about humanity right now to please go seek out organizations like Alliance, like Better Boundaries, and many others that are the agents of change. Seek out the candidates that are running in your district. Hopefully most people around this conversation are from HD 49, but many aren't. If you are in HD 49, I'm your guy. I would love your support. I want to champion your causes. So, and I look forward to having your support, having you join our campaign team, and together, let us make the change. So at this point, I want to stop and hand it over to Ashley to entertain the questions and answers.
Thank you so much. And this was a great discussion to be listening in on. We have a few questions. One from Scott Renshaw. Scott says, as progressive in the state of Utah and in District 49, obviously there are ongoing frustrations regarding feeling represented. Siamak, you're running in a House district where I think it's fair to say the odds are stacked against Democrats. What do you consider a couple of key components to breaking through the red state wall and shifting the balance even incrementally?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you asked that, Scott. Look, in 2018, person who ran for this seat, Anthony Sudweeks, came within 500 votes. That's impressive. By all accounts, that's impressive. We have seen since 2012 the demographics of this district change. We're not what it used to be a decade or longer. we absolutely have the momentum on our side. We have the passion, we have the energy to win this seat, and not only flip the seat, but break the supermajority of Republicans in the state. Why is that important? Balance is important. If you are a Democrat in the state house under a supermajority of Republicans, you can't even bring up a bill. I mean, we cannot make change. We cannot hold people accountable with a super minority position. So it's crucial for us to make sure that we flip this seat. And as we have seen, we are building a broad coalition, not just Democrats, all the way from progressive Democrats, moderate Democrats, independents, and moderate Republicans. We have Republicans in our campaign team because this is a big tent. We're not in our own bubble. We want to be the representative that addresses everybody's concerns, everybody's voice. So we believe that this is absolutely winnable, and we are going to win it. But we need everybody to step up. I hope that answers, Scott. Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's a great answer, and I would echo all of those comments. I think in addition to that, and maybe just different ways of saying some of the same things. I mean, I do think the demographics are changing, there's no question. And our district, frankly, is a prime example, as you already said, of that. I think there are so-called moderate Republicans in the legislature who are not moderate because that's what they believe. They're moderate because they have to stay in office. And quite frankly, ours is one of them. Here in HD 49, he's not the only example. There's several throughout the Valley here where the seats are held by so-called moderate Republicans, and that's because that's what the voters are in those districts, right? So these shifts can happen, they will happen. You know, this is a big pendulum. If you go back, it's really only 30, 40 years ago, seems like forever, but when we had Governor Matheson and I think the Democrats controlled the legislature. So these things do shift. And I think that we need, you know, it goes back to how do we get people involved? How do we get people to pay attention? How do we get people to seriously help? And frankly, I hope my good friend is not watching. If you live in Brian King's district, come volunteer in HD 49 instead, because Brian's gonna win, right? I mean, you know, Brian's gonna kill me for saying that, I'm sure. But it's the
He might be on this. He might be on this conversation.
Oh, great! Don't tell him I said that. We have to get people to think about where they can make a difference and be involved. And this is the perfect kind of seat. This is a winnable seat.
Thank you, Josh.
And getting great candidates like you to step up and take that chance. And I mean, look at, you know, I'm sure everybody, because they're basically our House district neighbors, I think, right? I don't know if we actually border them, but look at Suzanne Harrison,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, she had an unwinnable proposition and came within 3 votes, and then made sure that she was willing to do it again, and now is, you know, a fantastic legislator. So we just got to make this incremental progress, and there are examples of how it can be done. So whether it's Anthony, who was fantastic, coming within 500, Suzanne in that first race, I think it was 3, right? There's 3 votes. It's crazy, but it can be done.
Absolutely, absolutely. And she has become one of the stars, not only in the party but in the Utah House.
In the legislature. Absolutely.
We're proud of her. Thank you, Josh.
I have a second question from Rabbi Wenger, and he asks, how do you respond to people who change their party affiliation because they believe no Democratic candidate can succeed?
Well, my response would be, it is okay for the primaries to switch so you can vote in a gubernatorial or whatever that may be. Just remember, the deadline for switching back That said, we need to have more faith in our candidates. This year, I've been looking at candidates that the Democratic Party has put forward. And I have to tell you, they're very, very impressive. I want you to listen to each and every one of them. We have really impressive people. Just like Josh said, maybe just 4 years ago, people were writing Suzanne Harrison off. Maybe they were writing several others off. Patrice Arndt challenged, I think at the time, the Speaker of the House and won. So please don't write us off. We would love to surprise you. And I think this year, with so much talent on the ticket, we're going to flip quite a few seats.
They say thank you for the response.
Josh, do you want to add to that?
Can I add to that? I think, you know, it's interesting because obviously it's Jim DeBacchus who made this, in many ways, a front page issue. I like to say I was Jim DeBacchus before Jim DeBacchus. I changed my party affiliation when we had a CD3 special election when Jason Chaffetz left office. And quite honestly, and this is going to get me in hot water with lots of my progressive friends, I don't even remember who was running. Well, maybe there wasn't anybody running because it was a special election to replace him. So it was just the Republicans. So I went in because I thought at the time, much to my disappointment now, but at the time it seemed like John Curtis was going to be a far better choice than the other people who were out there. And I wanted my voice heard. And I'll also admit that out of complete laziness, I haven't switched back. So I am to this day a registered Republican, but it doesn't, you know, look, the reality is as Democrats, we're the ones running an open primary or an open elections, right? We can vote in any primary. So I'm not prohibited from coming in and voting, which is what I do 99% of the time. And then we have a gubernatorial race like we have right now. And frankly, I think even on the gubernatorial race, you can look at it in two different ways, right? You can look at those people who have written Chris Peterson off, which I think is a huge mistake. Chris is
absolutely
amazing. Amazing.
Yes.
If you guys don't know Chris, he's amazing.
Yes.
But you could make the argument, go vote for Greg Hughes so that Chris has an easier race against a Greg Hughes than against a John Huntsman.
Agreed.
Now, that may not be why some people did it. Some people may have done it because they wanted to make sure that Huntsman or Cox or Hughes or whoever won that race. So I think there's a lot of reasons that people do it. I think there's quite honestly nothing wrong with it. And really the right answer is that the Republicans should have an open primary just like we do, in which case you wouldn't have to switch your party affiliation. But that's the position that they forced people into. And I don't think it's about throwing away your vote. And I don't think it's about writing off the Democrats. I think it is opportunistically and surgically going in and saying, this achieves my goals. And whether I or Siamak or anybody else believes that you're interpreting those goals correctly, we're all entitled to our interpretation and trying to achieve that goal.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for bringing up Chris Peterson. If I can make a pitch for him, please everybody, go to his website, go to Chris Peterson and Karina for governor and lieutenant governor. These guys are I'm proud to have these guys lead the ticket in Utah. They're charismatic, they're brilliant, and they're community servants. So I want to make a pitch for them and I can't do enough. So invite everybody to go visit and familiarize yourself with their platform.
Our next question is from Nilofar. As you know, improving student mental health is crucial. There has been an effort by school districts in this respect. How can we further increase access to these services?
Would you like me to go first, or Josh, do you want to take a stab at it?
No, you go ahead. I was unfortunately distracted for 1 second by reading that my colleague Chase wrote about me being a Republican I got distracted for a second. Thanks, Chase.
I'm glad somebody didn't let you get scot-free. Okay, so for those people that don't know, I actually, my background is really the CEO of psychiatric facilities for adolescents. In Arizona, we ran a 60-some bed residential treatment center for adolescents. And so mental health and addiction treatment for adolescents is my passion, is what I've done for decades. To add to that, I implemented a series of mental health clinics inside schools on the Navajo reservation. Those were incredibly successful. At some point, I would love to introduce that model here in Utah. So obviously, I'm very, very passionate about mental health and mental health in our schools. I would like to hold all of those people, especially the politicians, who are using the stay-home orders as causing depression and mental health and addiction issues, to remember what they're saying now, because I'm going to come to them and hold them accountable for what they said. And I'm going to make sure that they do not cut the funding to make up for the shortfall in the budget, but add to it. Right now is the most crucial time, not only for our society as a whole, but our kids and kids in school. We need to have robust treatment components, including professional counselors, much like the lady that just asked that question, Nilufar, as a school psychologist. I want to make sure that all of us remember all of those people who said, we need to get children back to school because they're battling mental health and other issues. Remember those and quote them back to them when we go back to them and say, don't you dare cut the funding further. So my position would be, our schools are no longer for education purposes only. Our schools have become educational, they've become case management, they've become the social work services, place they can actually get food, many other things. So we need to rise up as adults and make sure that schools have the funding they need to operate. Josh?
I can't say anything as about it as eloquently as you just did. I think it is a huge crisis. I think coming out of this pandemic, it's not just for students. I think this is the biggest boogeyman in the room that we're going to have to face, is the mental health crisis coming out of this pandemic. I think our legislature needs to step up, and that's both in the schools and out of the schools, and recognize that mental health is an issue that is only getting worse. We've driven, policies, and I don't know that I can say this articulately, but right, we've driven tax policies and other policies that have forced right to work policies, you name it, that have put us in a position where parents, if there even are two parents, are working multiple jobs. Children are on their own. Guns are in the home. Domestic abuse is on the rise. Child abuse is on the rise. I mean, these things are all interconnected, and our legislature would prefer to stand up and say, well, we can't infringe on someone's Second Amendment rights, and not talk about ERPO, and not pass an ERPO bill, and not provide safe storage when guns are the #1, I believe, hopefully I'll get this right, the #1 tool of teen suicide, and we have the highest teen suicide rate, I believe, in the country. So these are all interconnected issues. They are so incredibly important. Our legislature is so falling down on the job, and it goes back to, we need to be out voting and replacing these people and making a difference, because this only gets worse until our policies change.
Absolutely. And if I may say so right now, Nilufar, we need experts like you on our campaign team. So you could be the voice of reason and advocacy for those kids and teachers. So I want to welcome, I want to invite you to lend a voice.
We're getting to the top of the hour. I want to take a moment to highlight Rochelle Kaplan's generous offer of any folks on this call making donations to Siamak's campaign. She will match up to $500 throughout the end of this call. So thank you, Rochelle, for that opportunity. And why don't we take a moment, Siamak and Josh, to wrap up with any final thoughts?
If I may,
I'll let you take the lead.
I just want to say I am grateful to people like Rochelle Kaplan, who are just keeping us motivated, keeping us going by your generous contributions, by your wisdom, by your support. So thank you on behalf of our entire campaign team. And if I may say so, the entire Democratic Party in Utah. So thank you. I'm going to let Josh go ahead, and I would like to just make a pitch at the end, if that's okay, Ashley. Okay, go ahead, please.
Sure. Well, I'll just close and first of all, echo the thanks to, there are a few special people in this town like Rochelle, and man, she's been a rock ever since I got here and have known her, and I appreciate her as much as anyone in town. We need more Rochelles, and all of you who are listening and paying attention. I mean, that you're further along that journey than people who aren't. And so find 2 friends and get them out there, and remember to vote and get involved in whatever it is. You know, make a small donation. People don't understand how, you know, $5 makes a difference, whether it's a campaign or an organization like Alliance for Better Utah. Pick an organization that you like. If you're into voter registration, go talk to Votarize. If you're into accountability, come talk to us. If you like LGBT issues, go talk to Equality Utah. I mean, there's no question there's a space for you and what you're doing. And just don't be discouraged. It's a long, again, I'd say generational process. I've been at this for 10 years. I have my days of getting super discouraged, and yet we wake up the next day and we start over. And I hope that everybody on here will find 2 friends and continue to do the same. And people, Siamak, like you, who are willing to step up and put your name on the line and put your family in this position. It's hard work to run for these offices. So thank you for doing it, and everybody's got to find their way to participate. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you very, very much for your generosity of time and being here with us. And thank you for everything you do for our communities. We're absolutely grateful. In closing, I just want to thank all of our campaign team members who have, for the past 4 or 5 months, worked so hard in building platform, in reaching out to different groups, reaching out to unions, everything that you've done, especially our youngest team members, the youth committee that is actually teaching us lessons. So we're grateful for that. I want everybody to please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. You want to find out about our position on various issues, please feel free. My text is available to everybody. The email address is siamak@siamakforutah. Our website is siamakforutah.com. Our Facebook is Siamak for Utah. And we also have Instagram and everything else. And so please go on and find out our positions. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to work with you. Come join our team and be that agent for change. So again, I want to thank everybody for being on this Facebook Live, and I want to send a huge shout out to our leader, campaign manager, Ashley, for putting this together and keeping us all on our toes. Thank you.
No problem. And one last message I want to share with everyone is we have our canvassing kickoff this Saturday, 10 to 1. We will be practicing social distancing and wearing masks. If you want to join, I put the sign up in this chat. I'm going to drop it again at the bottom. And at the end of that, after 1, we're going to do a lunch and a meet and greet in Siamak in the cul-de-sac. So if you just want to get a chance to meet Siamak, that's another opportunity, and get lunch. We'd love to have you. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining in tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Josh.
Thank
very
you.
much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Go forth and win.
Yes. Thank you.